3. We have arrived in the part of our study of the book of Colossians where we're looking at the practical side of our Christian faith and what God expects. And as a Christian, especially a Christian living in a world that it doesn't always follow the will of God, we wonder sometimes what we're supposed to do and how we are to live. Many of us work for, we have to work because we have to live, we have to eat, and sometimes we get put in positions where it's questionable of what the right thing to do is, or what the right attitude may be, or how do we maintain a good attitude. And in our study of the book of Colossians, we know that we've already been challenged to separate ourselves from the philosophies and the teachings of the world. And that as we do that, we serve God. And in person, we serve Jesus Christ. He is the image of the living God. He is God that came in the flesh. He is God who paid for our redemption. He is the God who is supreme over the universe. And so to follow His word and to follow His leading is expected. And so we're going to look at chapter 3. We're going to start about verse 22 where we move from the family to work. And how do we maintain those Christian values? This started about verse 18, where he began to talk about the family and family values and how we live for Christ in the family, how we serve Christ in the family, how do we do the will of God in our families. And of course, he starts with the wives. I don't know if he started with the biggest problem first. Is it raining? Okay.
Ginger.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
I mean, it's done the afternoon out in the rain, but no, I think there's a reason for that. And I think that the reason he starts with wives first, because he's talking about the home. And he's not showing anything other than, ladies, you are more receptive to spiritual things than men are. Right or wrong or otherwise, men, we have to pay attention to our wives and to our mothers and to our sisters because they tend to be more in tune with God's leading and more in tune with God's presence than men are. Okay, and I think that's why he starts there, because for many times in the home, it is the ladies who actually are more in touch. And so then he moves on to men. And he says, men, you're to love your wives. And that means like Christ loved the church. And what you do for them. And you not only serve them, and you not only work with them, but what you support them. And you do many, many things for them. And of course, a lot of men understand this, because when we think about our home and our wives and our families, if there's something wrong, we want to fix it. Okay, if there's something wrong, we have to dive in, and in our own minds, it's up to us to correct the problem. Sometimes that's not up to us. Sometimes it's just a problem that needs to run its course, and we need to get more insight on. But he talks to men. He says, men, love your wives. And by the way, children, obey your parents. Okay, now he's talking about little children. He's talking about kids, teaching kids the value of obedience. And of course, that is true still today. These values are still there. They're still true, that we are to teach our children to obey, that it is like a muscle. It needs to be developed. It needs to be exercised, because all of us have to obey. Okay, you obeyed speed laws, hopefully, getting here to church this morning. You drove on the right side of the road instead of the left side. You waited for red lights. You stopped at stop signs. That's obeying. Okay, when you get a loan, you have to obey the conditions of that loan, or they come and get it, or they call you every 5 minutes and want to know where your money is. And so there are many, many things you have to obey your whole life. And so teaching that early in a loving setting, with people who really want the best in their lives is an important value. But he says, as the children grow, and he uses actually two different words here. In verse 21, he says, fathers, do not embitter your children. Or in other words, as they begin to grow, and that relationship begins to change, we give them more and more responsibility. The relationship is growing stronger, and as they are still young adults, be aware of that changing relationship. Because as they grow, we can still say, thou shalt not. You can't marry this person or that person, or you begin to come in and treat them like little children. Okay, so we have to grow in our relationship. Otherwise, our children become angry and discouraged, and they stop following Christ, which is what Paul wants. In all of this, Paul wants us to be an example of a Christian home. He wants us to be, he is committed to Christian families. And he's committed to that in a way that we are living for Christ in our homes. In fact, he says, in everything we do, everything we say, everything we do it all to the Lord Jesus Christ, as unto the Lord. And so, in other words, our families are an extension of our walk with God. And so whatever our role is, or whatever our position is in the family, it's an extension of our relationship with God. That carries through and carries on. And so that's the setting when we get to verse 22. Now from 22 to 4:1, we need to understand the context here. We need to understand the wording here. Because this is more like the employer-employee relationship than it is about slaves and purchasing slaves, people as property, and using them as a tool to accomplish what you need to accomplish. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking more about a relationship that is there as an extension of our family. And in this day, it actually has to do with Jewish homes who would, as an extension of their home, if they were able, they would help their families, their extended families. They would pay their debt, and in return, they would come and work for you. They were called bond slaves, or you would attach yourself to a kinsman redeemer who could redeem your debt and then give you a second chance. Because the idea is that you would work for them and serve them, paying back your debt through service, and then you would get to a point where the debt was paid, you paid off your debt, and your kinsman redeemer, your person that you were serving, your master, would say, okay, would you like to, your debt is paid, you're free to go, and start again. And you may say, well, I really don't, I don't think I'm a good person to be out and trying to start a business on my own. I'm not good at that. And so I'll commit myself to you as a bond slave. It wasn't a bad thing. It was a way of helping people get back on their feet, giving them a second chance, and then responding many times to their their extended family in love and saying, I'm going to commit myself to you, and that's when you would take and put your ear on the doorpost, and they would pierce it into the doorpost as a sign that you're binding yourself with love to that person, to that family. And so some have said that as many as 1/3 of the Jewish community were in this situation. 1/3, think of that. 1/3 of the people were bankrupt. Economically bankrupt. And so rather than being out in the streets and begging, they were serving whoever was willing. Be a family member, but whoever was willing to say, I'll pay your debt, you come and work for me, and we'll settle on the arrangements, and you serve. And so that's the setting here. Okay, the setting is very much not, I'm purchasing a person. That's not what this means. Okay, the other thing that we have to know about this text, and about Paul, and about what he's doing, is he is not an activist. Okay, he's not saying this is right or this is wrong. He's saying this is what it is. And so how do we live with what it is? Okay, how do we serve Christ for what it is? Because remember that it doesn't matter what we say or what we do, we are to do it all as unto Christ. Why? Because he's Lord of all. He is Lord of the universe. He is our Redeemer. He gave his life to purchase us our redemption. We have been redeemed. We have been made alive in him. And so now we serve him. And the point Paul is making throughout this section is a lot of times we get hung up on who we answer to. Paul says, if you set your mind on things above, if you set your heart on things above and serve God, then what the people that we end up having to obey and serve and either employ or work for, yes, there's a way we can do that and still serve Christ. But we're going to answer ultimately, everyone is going to answer ultimately to Christ. That's a hard thing for some people to wrap their heads around. Now, what I like about this passage is Paul does not, this isn't a left turn from the Old Testament. All the way through the Old Testament, we see people who were serving Christ, were conquered, dragged off into captivity, still serve God, even in the fiery furnace. They still served God, even though they were in the employ of a king who was less than following God. But they served God. And they served God, and they did their best. And that's kind of what we see here, is that principle continues. So let's look at what he says. He says, slaves, verse 22, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only with their eye when their eye is on you, and to win their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. So what he's saying is that we can, when we are working in this world, we can get into a situation where we're busy when the boss is around. We're busy when the foreman comes around. We're busy when we know there are eyes on us. One of the things that we need to learn is that if we're serving the Lord, then we're serving the Lord. We're not slacking. Okay, because his eyes are always on us. His eyes are always seeing. He sees when it's hard for us. He sees when we are tired. He sees if we cut corners. He sees that. And so that's the way we are to work. And so in that, we can say, that's no good. He cheated me out of hours, or I'm not supposed to be doing that job. That guy over there is supposed to be doing that. And so why am I doing that? And so then we begin to slack, and we bring that foreman, that boss, that person who is our authority in this life, we bring him into the mix and say, I'm not going to do everything you think I'm going to do. I'm going to get mine. And so as a employee, we can cheat our employers and justify it. The problem is, we're not serving our employer. We're serving Christ. That's why he says, as unto the Lord. As unto the Lord. Now that also means another thing. If your employer asks you to do something that's unethical, what then? Well, it may be time to go in the fiery furnace, but God does not expect us to do wrong. God does not expect us to do evil. God is not saying you choose your employer over your moral character, your service of Him. And that's why there's that connection to the Old Testament. That's why we see over and over and over Joseph mistreated by his brothers, sold into slavery, went into Egypt, but still served God. He was very much in touch with God when his brothers came into Egypt looking to buy food. Very much in touch with God. But he was still, the second highest in the land? And so he probably had lots of opportunity to compromise, but didn't. Ended up being thrown in prison at one point because he wouldn't compromise with his master's wife. Doesn't mean we won't suffer. It does mean that we're serving the Lord, because He is the Lord. Okay? Let's go on. He says that we are to do this sincerely and out of reverence for the Lord. By the way, reverence there. Same kind of the word as reverend. It means fearful and awesome. I'm not sure I live up to that. But what does that mean? That means out of respect and awe of who God is, and we know that everyone will answer someday to God. Every knee will bow, and whether they think they're all and powerful and authorities in this world, there is a higher authority that we must answer to. There's a higher authority that we must consider. Okay? That's what that means. Verse 23. It says, whatever you do, that pretty much covers a lot of things. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for men. Man, that's sometimes hard to see. That sometimes is difficult when we're down in the trenches working and we feel like we're being taken advantage of, or that's hard to do. He says, work for the Lord. That'll keep your working sincerely with your heart, with your passion, with your desire to do a good job. That keeps that straight. We don't let those people who even may take advantage get in the way of our service. He says, serve the Lord. Now he continues on in verse 24, it says, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. In other words, serving the Lord is going to pay off. It's going to pay great dividends. It's It's going to be huge. He continues and says, it is the Lord Christ you are serving. It is the Lord Christ. Jesus is in all, over all in all. He is Lord of all. And so we are serving the Lord and going to be rewarded by the Lord. Okay, there's going to be some who are going to suffer loss of reward, and some who are going to gain great reward. It's who you're serving. It's who you're serving. We let people be our excuse for our bad attitudes. And I probably ought to come over here because I'm as guilty as anyone. Serving the Lord pays off. And it pays off in the long run. Okay, let's continue. He said, we receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Verse 25. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid for his wrong, and there is no favoritism. How many times have you been on the short end of favoritism? How many times have you been on the good end of favoritism? It's by who you know and not by what you do. You know, that happens. That's the way people are. They gain favor, they get close to people, they put on a show, and it's because they want to be rewarded for it. And sometimes they are. Even though their desires, their motives are totally self-serving. You say, well, yeah, but you ought to see them when your back is turned. The Lord does. Okay, the Lord does. And if we're serving the Lord, He does not treat with favoritism. Now put that in context. Who's He talking about? Is the big picture. We're going a little big picture here. He's talking about churches. He's talking about individuals. He's talking about wives, husbands, children, growing into adulthood. He's talking about employers, employees. He's talking about all people. There's no favoritism. He doesn't look at people with favoritism. He looks at the heart. That's an Old Testament principle. Okay, let's go one more. Verse 4, or chapter 4 and verse 1, it says, masters or employers, those who have authority over other people. Okay, you could even plug that in for children and, parents, could be. Provide your slaves or employees with what is right and what is fair, because you know that you also have a master in heaven. Okay, what does he mean by that? And I think what he is saying is that there's a saying we use a little bit, probably not the best saying, but it's play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Okay, I think what he is saying is, don't play the game of shortchanging, whether you're on the employee side or the employer side, don't play that game. Don't play that game. Don't treat people unfairly. Does that sound like anything? Treat them rightly, which anything that you see is right in the Bible, treat them what is right has to do with righteously. Okay, that's a shorter version of that, but it's pointing us to a passage, pointing us to a truth, an established truth that goes way back into the Old Testament. And what is I think he is connecting here is Micah 6:8. He has shown thee, O man, what is good and what the expects of you. Do you know those things? Because this is an extra question. That's a question. And it is to do justly. To do justly. To treat people fairly. To love mercy. And to walk humbly with your God. There's three things in that passage. He is showing us how we live that out in a modern world, no matter what setting we find ourselves in. No matter who's in charge. No matter who you're serving, we serve Christ. No matter who we're responsible for, we serve Christ. No matter who signs the paycheck, we serve Christ. And the way we do that is righteously, justly, fairly, because we're walking with our God. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your word today, and I pray that we would see the wisdom of living for you. It doesn't mean that we just are so earthly minded that we're no earthly good. But Lord, our focus is on you, our passion is to serve you. And you've put us here to walk with you, to serve you. And in doing that, we live, we have homes, we have work, we have people we're responsible for. Help us to be right in our dealings. Help us to be fair in our dealings. Help us to continue to walk with you, because it's in walking with you that we keep our